Okay, everyone, we are in call 4 of the 4-call series or 4-call boot camp on maintaining and servicing your active listings. So this call is really, it's going to be very straightforward. It's going to be 10 points that you need to understand, not only write down, but study them and really make sure that they're part of your systems that you have set up for your clients on the listing side. And the reason that these are so simplified, but they're also so important, is because when you're talking about servicing your clients and potentially getting referrals down the road and just creating a good experience for them, then this is the whole goal, is to get them to the point where they've received an offer that becomes acceptable to them, and you get them to the closing process. This is also the time where most of the problems, if they're going to happen, you've gotten through all the pitfalls, you've gotten through all the issues that have happened up to this point. Now you get an offer. Well, there's a lot of stuff that happens from the contract through the closing. There's a lot of setup that needs to take place, and there's a lot of things where it can kind of go sideways, and you don't want to ruin that experience, and you want to be able to get them the results that they're looking for, which is actually get the property sold. Okay, so let's look at these 10 points. So 10 steps to maintaining great service through the closing and actually beyond, because we want it to go beyond just that closing period. When they get their check, you get your check, and they move on. Okay, so number one, understand that maintaining service through the closing and beyond really starts, like we talked about in the first call, it starts at the listing presentation. So there's a setup that has to take place at the listing presentation, and if you haven't done that, then it's going to be a challenge. If you look back through your closings, if you haven't done that in the past, you'll probably see, wow, I ran into some issues at the closing because that was the first time that they heard about the fact that I use a closing coordinator, or is the first time that they heard anything about some of the other things that come up when you're negotiating a contract. So you want to make sure that you set up the closing process from the beginning. Talk about what's going to happen when you get an offer at the listing presentation, okay, so that they know what's going on. You also want to talk about, this is one point that is part of this conversation, but a lot of times people don't remember it, or they don't get in the habit of talking about it. You need to cover what happens if all of a sudden when we get an offer, it's a lowball offer. Now, you're going to see another one of these points. That's all perception, but basically a lowball is probably going to be whatever a seller thinks is acceptable. Anything lower than that, they're going to call it a lowball offer. So let's talk about ahead of time, how are you going to respond to lowball offers? Okay. Second one, you need to be proficient at the difficult conversations or the complicated conversations. One of them deals with lowball offers. Hey, we're going to make sure that we respond to every offer that comes in. Every offer that comes in, we're going to be able to negotiate. Just like if it was a great one, if you guys think it's not a great one, that's okay, because we've seen people come in with low offers and come up to something that was acceptable. That's one of those conversations. You need to be really proficient at that. It's going to come up. Another one would be being able to explain when buyers are asking for sellers to pay their closing costs. Then do you know how to explain that conversation so it doesn't become a deal breaker? I have seen countless clients have issues, just the fact that it says seller paying closing cost. Just the fact that it says that. It doesn't matter whether or not the net's acceptable. It's just the fact that they say, I'm not paying for anything for that buyer. I'm giving them the house for free. All that stuff, you need to be able to know how to have that conversation. That's one of those ones where deals, negotiations can stop dead in their tracks if you're not proficient at that conversation. Another one that I wrote down would be, how do you deal with offers, and how do you explain the conversation of when there's a contingency on that buyer purchasing or the buyer selling their own home? Sometimes we get contingencies with the buyer's home and it's under contract already. That's a much different conversation. It's a much different scenario for your seller, and it's probably going to have a little bit different guidance from you than if they're just putting a contingency offer in and their property's not even on the market. but do you know how to have that conversation with the seller when it comes up? Because if you don't, then you may actually miss out on a deal that could be put together just because you're not really sure on how to guide them through that conversation. So the seller just shuts down, just says, tell them no, okay? And the last one I wrote down was on the subject of owner financing. So, you're going to get some times where agents are going to call and they're going to ask, hey, is your seller open to owner financing? You want to be able to understand that process enough so that you can go and present that to a seller and be able to explain to them, what it means. If you show up and the seller's an agent brings you this offer or this potential offer, and you don't know what the subject matter is, there's no way that you're going to really be able to provide that great service and have them actually have a chance to be able to get the deal done. So those 3 or 4 conversations are really, really important. Be skilled at those conversations to be able to go through that process with the seller. Point 3 I wrote down was you want to present all offers with a script. Present all offers with a script. Now, doesn't mean that you don't necessarily personalize it. I will tell you that presenting the offer script that I have used from day one in this business is still very, very, very similar to the original one that I used. It's not one where I've personalized it a whole lot because, frankly, it's really just setting up yourself to go through all the facts of the contract. Presenting the offer is just straightforward. There's no, at this point, it's not like there's a reason to go one way or another. You're really presenting the facts of the contract. But there's a way to present the facts that's going to make you more effective. Also, I'm going to bring this up a couple of times in this conversation. The more consistently you do things, the better off you are. Because when you're talking about presenting an offer and you're going through every point the same way, you start off and you say, we've got 3 options. We can accept it, we can reject it, we can counter, and then you go through the facts, and then you finish with the price. There's going to be a time at some point in your career where somebody's going to dispute whether they were told something that was in the contract. Now, if you go back through and you jump from one thing to the other and you don't have a specific, somebody says, well, how do you present your offers? And you're like, well, I just kind of go through this stuff and then I'll ask them if they have questions and stuff. It's all over the board. You're going to be less likely to have that confidence that, I went through all this stuff. On the flip side, if you present every offer the same, every single one of them, and then you can show, here's my notes where I wrote the stuff down from the offer. I wasn't just like scrolling through my email. I actually have a page that I present off of. It's pretty likely that when somebody says, I wasn't told this, and you're looking at your notes and it's on there, the likelihood is that you did go through it. So you want to be very consistent, and that involves using that script. Okay, make sure that you hit all those points. The 4th point that I wrote down, and I'm going to stop right here and just make sure you understand. The first 4 or 5 of these are all before there's a yes to the offer. So just understand how important this process is before we even get an accepted contract. This is a big part of it. Presenting the offer and the things that you're going through, the conversations and stuff like that are really, really important in order to get to an accepted offer. And then we'll talk about after that offer is accepted, how do we go through the closing process. But I just want to make sure that you kind of are recognizing that. So number 4, you need to believe and convey to your seller that every offer is a good offer. Be able to believe yourself and be able to convey through your conversations to the seller that every single offer is a good offer. Now, you may in your heart feel like, wow, that seems really, really low. But your job is not to determine what's a good offer and a bad offer, just like your job is not to go ahead and, be the person that makes sure that an offer comes in. You can't control that. You also can't control the price that it comes in at. You can't control whether the buyer or the seller accepts it or rejects it or counters. So just present it in the most positive light possible. So it starts with you believing it. Now, there are some reasons why every offer is a good offer, regardless of whether it works out. From your standpoint, it gives you some more insight into where the seller is actually at. Because there's a lot of times where sellers, they are not getting any offers, and they're giving you the impression that they're really not that motivated, that they don't want to do what it takes to get the property sold. And you may be having conversations with them about improvements they should make, or price adjustments, or things that they need to take care of around the house, and they're not receptive to that. Well, then if an offer comes in, you'll be surprised sometimes, because it gets the seller back in the mindset of selling, even though it might not be an acceptable price, gets them back in the mindset of selling, and it gets them back to thinking, you know what, this might be possible. Maybe I need to listen to what my agent, the professional, is telling me a little bit more. So that can be very, very good. Also, anytime there is an offer, typically in the seller's mind, they understand a new value that they're willing to take for their property. A lot of people are, they're kind of the mentality, and this is, just in their past, they want to see the offer before they even consider negotiating from what they have in their mind. So if they get an offer, you may see somebody go, wow, they've been fighting me, asking them to make a $10,000 price adjustment, then they get an offer and they come off $40,000 for that offer. Well, that's somebody who probably is just kind of the old school negotiating process, where they're just like, hey, show me an offer and then I'll negotiate from there. They're not interested in some of the strategies that involve maybe pricing a little bit closer to where they're at. They just want to see the offer. So every offer is a good offer. Don't start the conversation with phrases like, boy, we got a lot of work to do on this one. Or another one that I hear all the time is agents will say, well, we got an offer. And then, of course, you can almost hear on the other end of the line, they say, well, what is it? And then the agent, the next thing out of their mouth is, well, I got some good news and I've got some bad news. No, there is no bad news when you have an offer. The offer is just that. It's an offer. It's not bad. It's just an offer. So just present it like that, and then your job starts in terms of the negotiation. Okay? Number 5. Now this one's a tough one. This one is tough, I think, for all of us, because we want to, we're competitive by nature, and we want to be able to do the best thing for our client, but sometimes you have to kind of shift gears a little bit mentally. So I wrote down, look at the other agent as an advocate, not an adversary. So what's that mean? It's not you against the other agent. It's not you and the seller against the other agent and the buyer. It's not one side versus the other. This should be two professional agents working for their clients, moving them together to a mutually acceptable conclusion, mutually acceptable contract. That's really what it is. And there's a lot of things that you're going to see on the other side, that you're going to hear on the other side, that it's going to frustrate you and things like that. You are probably, with the training and the coaching that you have available at our offices, you are probably going to have an opportunity to coach the agent on the other side of the deal more than you ever even believed. There's a lot of inexperienced agents out there. There's a lot of agents that go in all with 100% emotion on the deal, and it really isn't about just trying to pull things together. It's just emotional, and they're as emotional as their buyer are. Those are tough situations to deal with, but you as a listing agent have to see your role as being the advocate, okay? You can also use this to your advantage in the negotiation, and an advantage in the negotiation is serving your client at a very high level. So how do you gain an advantage in the negotiation? You can actually speak through the agent to the buyer on the other side. Now, clearly, you can't pick up the phone and call the buyer and say, hey, my seller wants to tell you this is what's going on. But how do you convey that message? So a lot of times, I will communicate through the agent to the buyer on things that I want them to know. So I'll use things like, Mr. Agent, can you share the following with your buyer client? And now I'm going to go through and I'm going to list 2 or 3 things. Maybe it's setting up the counter that we're doing. So maybe we're coming back with a counter, and I want to make sure that the buyer knows the reason that we're coming up with these things. The mistake a lot of agents will do is they'll go back to the agent and say, well, Mr. Agent, we're countering at $325,000 because he's got all new stuff and he's got a new HVAC, and this is the nicest unit that has been out there in the last couple of years. That's why we're priced there, and that's why we're countering at this number. It's like, wow. First, the agent isn't the one buying it. That message has to get to the buyer. The agent isn't the one that's writing the check for it. And when you present it that way to the buyer's agent, then the buyer's agent's like, well, God, they don't need to tell me about this. I know what the comps are. Blah, 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 blah. So now you got this banging heads together. And how well do you think that agent's going to convey that to the buyer on the other end? It's not going to happen. And if it does happen, it's going to go something like this. They're going to call the buyer and they're going to go like, well, they're coming back and saying that it's got all these upgrades, and we know there's another one that, it does. It's nice, but that doesn't have anything more than the A3 that we sold, last year. So the message is totally getting mixed up there, and it doesn't get to the buyer in the right fashion. So the way that you do something like that is say, listen, Mr. Agent, I know I've got a counter for you guys, and I just want to let you know ahead of time. I'm going to work really, really hard to get this together, and I know that you are too. So I wanted to see if you'd be able to share a couple of things directly with the buyers, okay? And then you go through, not emotionally, just go through. I want to just remind them, I'm not sure if they saw in the notes, but we've got a new HVAC. They've done these upgrades, and this has been the rental income on the property. Can you go ahead and make sure that the buyer knows that? Now, listen, here's what happens on the other side of the transaction. When you go to the buyer's agent professionally and just say, can I have your permission to can you cover this stuff with the buyer? They're like, oh, yeah. The buyer's agent wants things that they can go to their buyer with to help pull the deal together. And it's coming from the other side. So the buyer agent might be looking at that going, man, they're 100% correct. All that stuff's correct. But if the buyer's agent goes and tells the buyer, hey, you should really consider they've done these upgrades and they've got a new HVAC and stuff like that, what's the buyer think? Buyer thinks the buyer's agent's just trying to get them up in price to make the sale easier, make the negotiation easier. So anytime that you're an agent and you can get information from the other side over to your client, and it's not you telling them that, then a professional agent appreciates that. So make sure that you're covering things through the buyer's agent over to the buyer that you want. And that can be either through, can you share the following with your client? Or another one that I wrote down that I use all the time is, my sellers really want your buyers to know. So anything that you can do to avoid having that confrontation and make sure that the buyer and the seller are, through their agents, communicating directly, that's a huge win in a negotiation. And the skilled negotiator is the highest skill that you can put forward for your clients. It's going to get them the deal, and it's probably going to get them a better deal than if they got somebody that just pulled it together. Number 6, you want to cover the steps from contract to close with your clients and introduce the closing department once the contract is together. So as soon as you get that contract together, then you want to cover, here's the next steps. It's going to go over to the closing coordinator. It's going to go to an attorney. The buyers are getting a loan. So this is what's going to happen from here to there, or from here to the closing. So you want to make sure that you cover those steps from contract to the closing department. Now, if you've kept up with the last few calls, you'll understand and you'll remember this should not be the first time that you're introducing the closing process, nor should it be the first time that you're introducing the closing department. This is all stuff that should have already happened. You're just reiterating it. Remember from the first call, when you cover things ahead of time, then it's seen as, wow, they're looking out for me. We're in this together. It's a partnership. When you cover things after the clients had to ask about them, everything that you tell them is probably going to be seen as an excuse. So let them know what's going on, who the closing department is, what they're going to do, and how you're going to be involved from here out. Let them know that this is not a replacement of you. This is an enhancement and one of the things that you provide so that your clients can have great service. It's the extra help that they need. Number 7, here's the point. Number 7, before it starts in the closing process, this is the point that you want to ask for referrals. Why? Because from contract to close, a lot of stuff happens. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. And most of the things that go wrong from contract to close are out of your control as the listing agent. But because there's only one person that is directly related to the seller, that's the listing agent and sometimes the closing department, then you being representative of the seller or the closing department being representative of you, you're going to take the beating. Okay? A lot of moving parts. Lots of things happen. Inspections, negotiations, the financing, delays, all kinds of stuff. So there's all kinds of things that can go wrong in there. And so you want to ask for your referrals when the client is the happiest. And that's once they've got a contract together. Because we know when they get a contract together and they've signed off on it, they've accepted that. And that for them takes them forward to their next step. So here's the point we want to say, you know what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I really appreciate your business. We're going to take care of everything from contract to close. Hopefully, I've met all your expectations and exceeded a lot of them, and I want to find out who else you knew that I might be able to talk to that's thinking about maybe buying or selling. Even if they don't have to they don't want to do anything right now, I'd love to just know their names. Who do you know right now? Collect that information now, and always thank the seller from that point if they give you one, or ask them a couple more times. Ask them at the closing and stuff too. But you want to make sure that you cover this now because there is a high probability that something out of your control could go south during the contract to close phase, and now they may be less likely to do that for you. Okay, so cover that when it's most relevant. Number 8, you need to set up automated and direct communication points. Automated, set up some scheduled emails, set up some scheduled texts. Use Contact Junkie to have a contract to close campaign. When somebody goes under contract, boom, now they go and they get all this automated stuff. In absence of automation, you need to have in your calendar, you put somebody under contract today, at bare minimum, you need to be in contact with them weekly. It doesn't have to be detailed stuff. If you set up the closing department the right way and they know that's their first resource and the attorney's doing their job and has contacted them, then once a week just checking in and saying, hey, I just want to make sure everything's good. You know I'm still here. Let me know if you need anything. That type of call goes a long way because now you're demonstrating that you're still involved instead of just telling them that. Very important. Automated and scheduled personal contact with the client, minimum one time a week while they're in the closing process. Note on new construction that just popped into my head. You write a new construction contract, you have to have communication set up through that process. Now, I understand most of the time, and this would be on the buying side because you probably are going to work with a buyer. It popped in my head, it's worth saying. A lot of complaints happen when write new construction, the agent representing the builder kind of takes over at that point, and all of a sudden you're 3 months down the road, you're like, oh my gosh, we wrote a contract, I haven't talked to those clients in 90 days. Well, understand, they're being taken care of, but they're being taken care of by the builder's representative, and in the back of their mind, they're like, wow, where is my agent? So make sure that you got some things in place for that if you're working with buyers on new construction at any point. Number 9, please do yourself and the closing department a favor. Inform your closing coordinator of anything specific, anything interesting about your clients that they need to know. If you have someone that's a real driver that doesn't like to really listen, that needs a little extra hand holding, that is a unique personality, any of those things, imagine you're the closing coordinator and you all of a sudden get this client that you've got to work with through this stressful process and you don't know anything about them. You're starting from scratch. I always make it a point to try to give the closing department a little bit of a heads up. Hey, this is going to be a smooth one. They're super receptive to things that we talk about. The listing went well. Everything is good. Just like if we've got the one where, this has been a difficult one. We had to make 3 reductions. They had a flood in the middle of the listing. They spent $5,000 they weren't thinking they were going to have. And they're honestly just upset and over this whole process. Boy, make sure that the closing department knows that that scenario happened, because they show up in the transaction not knowing any of that. And they're trying to jump in and say, hey, this is great. We got a contract. And the person's like, great. This is terrible. This has been the worst process of my life. And now the closing coordinator feels bad. The seller's even more mad because they're like, who's communicating? Nobody even knows that I've been through the ringer on this deal. That stuff is so easy to avoid. Make sure that you and or your assistant, if you've got staff, let that closing department know there's something unique about this one. This is going to help you out from the contract to the close process. Okay. Then the last one I wrote down was set up follow-up for the next 12 to 18 months minimum with these sellers. Now, I know in our market we've got a lot of people that sell and they're gone from the market, but they know people that may still be in here. So go ahead and set up your follow-up process so that you can actually continue giving great service by being a resource for those sellers here in the market as the closing takes place and they move on from that. Okay, you'll over time get business from people who've been sold out of the market for a couple of years, but they still know people in their building. They're still on group chats. They're still on Facebook pages and stuff like that. If you give them great service through the process, you're likely to be a referral source for them down the road. So hopefully this information is going to help you. Remember, those 4 calls, there should be things in each one of those that you can go and implement now, and to make sure that you're taking advantage of giving the best service and getting the results that the client's wanting. This concludes the 4-part series. Reach out to me anytime if you have any other questions or need more details on anything that we've covered, and I wish you the best of luck. Thanks.